Week 2 of the 2023 XFL season is wrapped up, and today, as we look forward to Week 3, I'll be giving you guys my updated power rankings. This is something that we do every week. We'll be ranking the teams in the XFL from top to bottom. Let's get started looking at number 8, and this team is by far the worst team in the XFL. It's been that way since the preseason, and that is the Orlando Guardians. This team took another bad loss. They lost to the San Antonio Brahmas 12-30 in their Week 2 matchup. They got blown out in Week 1 to the Roughnecks, so this team falls to 0-2, and they were number 8 in our preseason rankings, and they are still number 8 as we look forward to Week 3. Paxton Lynch was the primary starter at quarterback this past week. He was 9 for 19, 79 yards and a touchdown. We saw DeAndre Francois play a little bit. Dormady didn't play at all, who was the primary starter in Week 1, so something to keep in mind. But Paxton Lynch is a quarterback who has been very underwhelming throughout his time in pro leagues, and so far in the XFL it's been that way as well. But in the lead for the backfield is Jermaine Martin, who put up 46 yards on 9 attempts, and then Javonte Payton was the top in receiving with 47 yards on 3 receptions. So offensively, this team just isn't very good. Defensively, I definitely say that they're the worst in the league. Just does not work out well for Orlando. And this team has got the Arlington Renegades in Week 3 on the road. They just took their first loss of the season in Week 2, so they're 1-1. I would say they're a top half team in this league, so doesn't look like it's going to be much easier a matchup coming up here in Week 3. Number 7 is the Las Vegas Vipers. The Vegas Vipers lost to the Defenders 6-18 in their Week 2 matchup. Brett Hundley had his first start at quarterback, 11 for 18, 98 yards. Pretty underwhelming stats out of him. Offensively, this team just couldn't get anything going. The lead rusher was Rod Smith. Lead in receiving was John Labette, and both players didn't even surpass 40 yards. And you look forward for the Vipers, they got the Sea Dragons in Week 3. I do think Seattle is by far the best 0-2 team. They've had 2 close, brutal losses, so it's not going to be an easy matchup in Week 3, but it's definitely a crucial one for both teams coming up. Speaking of which, number 6 is the Seattle Sea Dragons. This team has faced 2 good teams, 2 of the better teams in the league, in the DC Defenders and the St. Louis Battlehawks. Lost to them both within 1 score. He lost to the Defenders by 4, scored 18 points in both matchups. But overall, I was actually fairly impressed with this team's performance against the Battlehawks. He was that way in Week 1 as well. I was impressed by the Sea Dragons. They just had a close loss. I mean, Ben DiNucci overall looked good. I mean, he was 19 for 29, 196 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions or anything. So I was impressed by DiNucci, and you also got Ja'Cour Pearson, who was the top in receiving. He had a good game, 4 receptions, 78 yards and a touchdown. Morgan Ellison was the top of the backfield with 50 yards on 10 attempts. So overall, I was actually fairly impressed by Seattle. This team has just been on the wrong end of 2 close losses. They're 0-2. Honestly, I consider putting them in front of the team that's at number 5, which is the San Antonio Brahmas. But this team beat the Guardians 30-12. Overall looked pretty good, so I do want to put the Brahmas at number 5. But 5 and 6 are very close. I did have the Brahmas at number 6 last week, so they're moving up. I think, the previous team in the Sea Dragons, they were just number 4, so they're moving down 2 positions. But the Brahmas at number 5, this team beat the Guardians 1-1 on the season. They did lose to St. Louis in Week 1 in what was a kind of a shocking loss, because the Brahmas controlled it for the most part, but then the Battlehawks came back and got him in the end. But Jack Cohn was impressive in Week 2, 16 for 24, 165 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's emerging as one of the top quarterbacks in this league. You got Kalen Ballage, who had 23 yards on 12 attempts. So that's 12 attempts and really didn't get much going, but he was the top in rushing. And then Elise Mack was the top in receiving, 48 yards and a touchdown. I still think of the Brahmas as very much a dark horse team in this league. I've got them at number 5, but they got a huge matchup coming up here in Week 3 against the Houston Roughnecks, who have been the most dominant team in this league so far. So that's definitely a very intriguing matchup coming up here in Week 3. Number 4 is going to be the Arlington Renegades. This is a team that has disappointed a bit so far this season. Had a close one against the Vipers, had a come from behind, one of the worst teams in the league, and then they lost to the Houston Roughnecks 14-23 in Week 2. This team was in the preseason expected to be definitely one of the top teams in this league. They still remain as a top half team in my opinion. I mean, they're 1-1. I've got them at number 4, but they haven't been quite as impressive as expected so far. Drew Plitt at quarterback, 15 for 30, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, over 2 picks. Overall, not terribly impressive for stats. We'll see. I think they should try out a couple other quarterbacks. In particular, this team has got Kyle Sloter. I do want to see him play in week 3. Hopefully, we do get to see him a bit because I think he brings more potential than Drew Plitt does. But yeah, Davion Smith as the top rusher, 16 yards, and Sal Cannella was the top in receiving, 4 receptions for 38 yards. Nothing too terrible. In week 3, they've got a matchup against the Guardians, far and away the worst team in this league. That is a crucial game for the Renegades there. You got to win that matchup, especially with it being at home. Number 3 is going to be the St. Louis Battlehawks. Your top 3 are all super close. The Battlehawks could be number 1. A.J. McCarron, he was impressive in week 2. Passing wise, 22 for 36, 184 yards and a touchdown. Rushing, he was the lead rusher on this team as well. 5 attempts on 41 yards on 5 attempts and a touchdown as well. So he's been impressive. He's brought experience to this team. I like how St. Louis is looking as we head into week 3. They were number 5 last week. They're jumping up to number 3. Hakeem Butler was the top in receiving, 4 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. This team has been impressive, and they've got a really intriguing matchup coming up here in week 3 against the DC Defenders, who I've got ranked just above them at number 2. That's definitely the most interesting matchup coming up here in week 3. 2 of the better teams in the league, both teams undefeated. The Defenders beat the Vipers 18-6, and their defense really proved to be solid in that matchup. And that's something we knew heading into the season. The Defenders' defense was going to be definitely a strong point of this team, and so far that's been the case. Offensively, this team hasn't been quite as good. Jordan Ta'amu just has not been impressive, 11 for 23 and 93 yards in week 2. Abram Smith was the top rusher, 11 attempts, 71 yards and a touchdown. He has been impressive, though, so far this season. This team has relied on him, and they've done okay with him in the backfield. This backfield in general has been good so far this season. It's just Jordan Ta'amu hasn't been too impressive. The top in receiving was Josh Hammond, 3 receptions for 24 yards. And obviously they got the Battlehawks coming up here in week 3. That's going to be a huge one. Definitely the best matchup coming up here this weekend. And number 1, we got a new number 1 team. The Defenders were 1 last week. This week it's going to be the Houston Roughnecks. This team was in the preseason number 6 for me. They have jumped up to number 1 in 2 weeks. They beat the Renegades 23-14. Second straight win that you could consider to be more of a dominant win. Won this past matchup by 9 points. Won in week 1 against the Guardians 33-12. So this team is 2-0. Brandon Silvers has looked generally good so far this season. 14 for 28, 173 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 2. Cole McDonald was the top rusher, 39 yards, and Ben Putman was the top in receiving, 65 yards on 4 receptions. This team has got the Brahmas coming up here in week 3. That should be also a solid matchup. The Brahmas, I've said this since the beginning. That Brahmas team is the dark horse team of the XFL, and they're gonna be a sneaky one. I don't know if they're gonna be the best team in this league, but with Jack Cohn, that team is definitely promising. So they are a team to keep an eye on. But that's it for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these power rankings, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Game predictions coming out within a day, so keep an eye out for those, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.